Welcome to Opinion Journal. I'm Mary Kissel. Republican Congressman Paul Ryan offered a budget plan today that balances the books within 10 years without raising taxes. In today's Wall Street Journal, he writes, quote, "In 4 of the past 5 years, the president has missed his budget deadline. Senate Democrats haven't passed a budget in over 1,400 days. By refusing to tackle the drivers of the nation's debt or simply to write a budget, Washington lurches from crisis to crisis. House Republicans have a plan to change course." Congressman Paul Ryan joins me now by phone from Washington. Congressman, what are the biggest differences between your budget and the one that Senate Democrats are expected to release?
Well, we'll see their final details, I believe, tomorrow afternoon or later this evening. But ours will balance and theirs won't. Not just within 10 years, but by all accounts, their budget will never, ever balance. That's point number one. Point number two is the President Obama has already signed $1.6 trillion of tax increases into law. This budget, reportedly, that the Senate Democrats are going to offer is to do another $1 trillion of tax increases on top of that. So that means they would have called for about $2.6 trillion in tax increases, about $1 trillion in lower spending, and that won't even ever get you closer to balance. The point I'd make is spending is the problem. Our spending is on a trajectory that's unsustainable. If you try to chase that higher spending line with just simply higher taxes, you'll end up ruining the economy, and you'll never catch up. So the point we're making is we need growth. We need pro-growth economic policies. That's what our budget calls for: tax reform, unleashing our energy potential, things like that, along with smart spending cuts and entitlement reforms that get our debt and deficit under control, that balance our budget and get our debt paid off. The Senate Democrats don't do any of those things, and they'll never, ever balance the budget based on what we've seen already from their forthcoming budget today. But at least they're passing a budget.
Let's talk about some of these numbers. Your budget repeals Obamacare, yet it keeps some of the Obamacare taxes. So does that count as gaming the baseline a little bit?
No, we don't keep the Obamacare taxes. We repeal all of the Obamacare taxes. What we're saying is we can take this current revenue line, the current law revenue line, and replace it with a better tax code. So we propose in this budget to repeal all those Obamacare taxes, the tax on health plans, the medical device tax, everything that's in there from Obamacare. We also don't like what we achieved in the fiscal cliff, which is an effective high marginal tax rate as high as 44.8%. We're saying get rid of those things and replace those taxes with a better tax system, lower rates, a broader tax base. We're saying let's have an individual system with 2 brackets, 10 and 25%, a corporate system of 25% that's territorial. We think we can have a much better tax system with lower tax rates and a broader tax base to substitute those taxes you just mentioned, Obamacare and the rest, and still raise the same amount of revenues as current law raises.
Let's talk about another issue that's dear to Republicans: defense. What happens to non-discretionary, or rather to non-discretionary defense spending or discretionary defense spending?
But it's great, yeah. So there's small part of defense is non-discretionary, meaning mandatory. But I think what you're asking is what happens to defense in this. We keep funding defense at the line that the Joint Chiefs say is essential to meeting the mission of the Pentagon. We don't go below that line. What we're worried about is in the future, with the sequester and other things, that the president might underfund defense priorities. So we keep funding defense at the line at which the Joint Chiefs claim is the minimum amount necessary to fulfill the needs and the missions of the Pentagon.
So some conservatives have criticized this budget for actually not going far enough. This one cuts about $4.6 trillion from a $46 trillion spending over the next decade. Is that really enough, or is this an effort to sort of move back towards the middle, Congressman?
No, this is very similar to the budgets that we've passed in the past couple of years. We get closer we actually balance the budget in large part because the baseline makes it easier to do so. But we think this is a smart budget that gets the goal of achieving a balance that accommodates the way for tax reform, for energy policy. We also want to do another round of welfare reform. We thought the 1990s was very successful in reforming cash welfare. We want to reform other welfare programs. And so this is not just a number exercise. This is good policy. The point I'm making is I don't think you can measure a budget, whether it goes far enough or not, or whether it's good or bad based on the numbers it hits. What matters more are the policies it includes.
Do you expect to find any common ground with Democrats?
Well, I think this is our opening bid. I don't think there are a lot of things in here that they like. We repeal Obamacare and replace it with patient-centered health care. We propose a much better system for Medicare without a rationing board that Obamacare proposes. Those are things that we have difference of opinions that are pretty far in between. But what I think does advance the ball with respect to getting common ground is actually going through the budget process. We're going to pass ours now, as we have been. But the Democrats, for the first time in 4 years, will actually pass a budget. What that does is it rebuilds the budget process, gets it back on track. And maybe at the end of the day, we're creating a legislative vehicle here, a process where we can get an agreement to get a down payment on debt and deficits, where we can get an agreement to get some spending cuts, albeit probably not as large as what we're proposing here, which this budget encapsulates our vision. But perhaps now that we have a budget process that is starting back up, as it should have been all along, maybe that will get us to an ability to get an agreement to get a down payment on the debt and deficit.
And do you expect the president to be involved in these negotiations?
At the end of the day, I sure do. I don't know if he will be on the nitty-gritty in between, but I spoke to the president last week where we basically concluded we need to get this budget process started again so that we can do this in plain sight, not in the back room, in the public's eye, so that people can see the priorities we're making, the decisions we're making, and get this process moving again so we can have an agreement at the end of the day to help get this debt under control. I do think the president supports that. I think he agrees with the notion of going back to what we call regular order. And where he is involved in that conversation, that's going to really be up to him.
Up to the president. Congressman Paul Ryan with his plan. Thank you so much for being with us.
You bet. Thanks, Mary.